Okay, next I want to talk to you about one of the coolest features found on the IK Multimedia UNO Synth Pro. I mean, it's a feature that I think is cool. No, it's actually a cool feature. Okay, so anyway, so we just have this sound. There's a button right here marked voice. Now, when you press voice, you get the option to affect how the synthesizer deals with its monophonic nature and its polyphonic nature. But first, let's talk about its monophonic nature. Now, we don't really have an amp envelope going here, so I'm going to make one. We're just in monophonic mode right now. So one of the things that has, one of the elements of monophonic sound is what happens when you press two notes at a time. What does the synthesizer do? When this is set to just mono, as we saw, it is not a low note priority or high note priority. It's last note priority, as you can see. On a low note priority synthesizer, if we did this and I did this, we wouldn't get anything. So that's what's happening. Also, with each note activation, you have a retriggering of the envelope, which is controlling, or the envelopes, which are controlling the amp, and in some cases, the filter. So you get this retrigger sound with every single note, which leads to a very specific sound. So that is basically what the monophonic setting does. If you press voice again, we'll get legato. Now, this was a configuration of Monophony that was how the mini mode was set up. So the difference is when you're holding a note, you can activate other notes, and those other notes are subject to whatever the current envelope settings are. So if the envelope settings are really short, you press a note and then you press another note, it's possible that the other note will be lost entirely in the fact that it's not retriggering the envelopes and they are closed or closing. So let's see if we got something similar here. So you can hear it going away because we're just dealing with a single envelope that's being held, and the activation of other keys is not retriggering that envelope. So as the envelope closes, we're going to lose the other notes. But that has a more natural sound to it. Or really a different sort of sound to it. But it was such that many vintage monophonic synthesizers employ the sort of legato functionality in regard to their monophonic structure. It's less weird than the monophonic. That's pretty weird. Anyway, it's less weird than that. So kind of more musical somehow. Anyhow, so those two functionalities exist. Now, the really fun one is this one, Paraphonic. Now, as some of you might know, I am a very, very devout advocate for the notion that when we are talking about note count, we talk about polyphony and not about paraphony. The term paraphonic means how the filter and amp deal with polyphony. A paraphonic structure is one where many notes play, but they're all going through one filter and one amp. That's a paraphonic structure. Now, because of the architecture of the UNO, this is actually true because it is treated like although it is going through 2 filters, you can't route various oscillators through individual filters and not through other ones. So really, this is truly a paraphonic synthesizer, absolutely. But it's really important for synth companies to make sure you know that you're not getting individual note articulation in the polyphony, because they don't want you to be mad when you find out you don't, because a paraphonic structure sounds different than a fully articulated polyphonic structure like a multiphonic synthesizer like the Prophet 5 or whatever. Anyway, so this is a paraphonic, this is a 3-note polyphonic synth when it's set to paraphonic, which is super cool. So let's hear a chord. Oh no. What? No chord? Where's the chord I was promised? Oh, why did it switch notes? Okay. I'm just harassing you. Basically, in this default I've been using, only oscillator 1's level is up. So what we need to actually do is go into the mix and make sure that all of the oscillators are up. All 3. Although I'm going to back them off a little bit, or they will distort, which is actually really cool. But for now, let's not have that. So you might notice that sounded a little bit weird. What we're first going to do is we're going to go to the oscillator section, and we're going to set these all to, well, we'll just go to triangle. It's the easiest. You can see kind of a legato thing is happening in regard to the paraphonic structure, because as a note is held, you can hear the single amp envelope going away, and it's not being re-triggered by the next activations of notes. But still, we can just play 3-note chords, because each oscillator now is directed to an individual note. Actually, let's move it to sawtooth. So it has a little more volume. As long as you're playing 3 notes at any time, and not more than 3 notes at any time, you're going to get a really reasonable polyphonic synth sound. Of course, the more of a filter effect or amp effect you have, you're going to start to notice that you only have 1 filter and 1 amp to work with. So if you're holding notes and you're trying to play other notes, you're going to lose them like that. And if there's a big filter envelope on there, it's only going to happen while 1 note is held, and it's going to be re-triggered every time you lift your hand and try again, and not re-triggered when you don't. But this is really cool, and because you have the opportunity to do some really cool things with this. Number one, how many synthesizers can you, well, I can name several, but typically people don't expect this, where each note of a chord has a different waveform. So like we could put oscillator 1 as a triangle, oscillator 2 is a saw, oscillator 3 is a square. Now you might hear some weird notes moving around. What you're probably hearing is the square wave moving around, because these things are typically allocated in such a way that the first note that is depressed gets the first oscillator, the second note gets the second oscillator, the third note gets the third oscillator. And unless you play very specifically, there are going to be subtle variations in which fingers are coming down at which times, which means the different waveforms are going to be switching oscillator place as you play. And it creates movement within a really unmoving, straightforward chord, which is really cool. One of the things I really like about it. Now my bass line is happening. To create a bass, because I only have 3 notes, but I still want to play chords, I am playing the bass alone and then playing chords sort of syncopated with the bass, which allows there to get this bizarre illusion that there is a bass and chords happening, because the first note, if there's nothing being played and I play, the first note down here as the bass note, it's going to go to the triangle, which is what oscillator 1 is set to. And then when I play a chord, all three of those notes, since I will then not be playing a bass note, will go, all three of the different wave shapes will be allocated amongst the chord. And it gives this impression that you've got a single triangle in the bass and then some other thing happening in the chords. But you can hear it, and it's just a really weird sound. Now, if you're expecting a normal multiphonic synth, like, traditional polysynth behavior, you're going to be like, what is it doing? That's really weird. But if you can just listen to it and enjoy it for its unique timbral execution, it's a really cool thing. And we haven't even talked about something else we could be doing. We press oscillator one more time. We can do things like... We can take oscillator 1. Let's leave oscillator 1 at 0. Oscillator 2 goes up an octave, and oscillator 3 goes down an octave. Or some such. Oh, we're still in the C's. That's why I did. Okay. And then that note allocation that happens becomes really pronounced, and you can hear the notes jumping all over the place. Because these individual oscillators are individual oscillators and they have their own individual settings that you can set. And Paraphonic just basically says, I don't care what you're set to. When two or more notes are played, you're doing this, and you're doing this. And so you just get these really interesting outcomes. So you probably could see that I was just playing the same chord through that whole thing. Anyway, that is one of the things I absolutely love about paraphonic synthesizers. And certainly it would be, let me just say it this way. That's what I really like about synthesizers that are monophonic, but then have this polyphonic allocation of the oscillators, even if it is going through a single filter or a single amp. Because the outcome, this concept was first implemented. This functionality was first implemented in the Korg monopoly, and it was a very unique thing to do. So it's been around since, 1982. It's just that not everyone has done it. But you can do it with a number of synths, like the Arturia Matrix Brute, although it is considerably larger than this. But no, so you can actually really reasonably play chords with this synthesizer. You can use it as a polysynth. There are a lot of presets that you're playing them and you're like, what is, the paraphonic nature is not immediately evident. And that's really cool. It's not like you have to settle for paraphony. It's easy to make a patch that sounds really good, even with a paraphonic functionality. And it allows you to have a small, compact, great sounding monosynth that can also play chords when you need it to. So that is the voice section of the IK Multimedia UNO Synth Pro.